Just like I said for months right here on this podcast, the Steelers went and got not one, but two new receivers in the NFL draft. But where do those guys rank in this year's class? And was it the best wide receiver haul of the NFL draft? And how will that impact the Pittsburgh Steelers this year? We'll talk about that on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, joined today by Wes Euler of Steeler Nation Radio. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things in the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find us on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. If you're watching this video on YouTube, hit the like button on this video. If you're enjoying it, hit the subscribe button to our YouTube channel to get all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our breaking news updates and our bonus episodes that come out from time to time. We thank you for making the Locked On Steelers podcast your first listen every day. If you want to help us out, go on Apple Podcasts. It was a 5-star review with a positive comment. Do both at the same time. You get a shout out at the end of the show. Join me today, my man Wes Euler from Steeler Nation Radio. Also, you can hear him on the Ears and Beers podcast covering your West Virginia Mountaineers. Wes, what's good?
Not too much, Chris. You know, NHL playoffs start, and I'm going to be drinking a lot of beers. I mean, like I need an excuse. That's happening all the time anyways. Who am I kidding?
I do have a question because you've always been baby-faced whenever I've seen you. Can you grow a playoff beard?
I could grow a playoff mustache, but that's about it. Like I am completely babyface, like sideburns on down. I could maybe grow like a little nasty neck beard, but if I didn't shave above the lip for like 4 or 5 days, I almost look like a hockey player from the 70s. Honestly, I just need to lose a couple teeth.
You're a little wild. All right. Let's get into the Steelers talk. Now, everyone is excited about the new weapons on the offense because that's where most of this draft went to. You had Kenny Pickett in the first round, but then you had George Pickens in the second round and Calvin Austin in the fourth round. So 3 of the top 4 picks go to the offense and specifically the passing offense. And there's a lot of intrigue here. Now, let's talk about George Pickens first. We talked about him a lot leading into the draft. As if the Steelers could manage to get him in the second round, it would be the perfect fit, and they nailed it. 52nd overall, didn't trade up, didn't trade back, didn't lose nothing for getting him, and now he's sitting there. And you look at his athletic profile, you look at his tape. He's a context catch dude. He can go up and he can win combat catches. He's got speed. He's got height. He's a dog. He fights every play. He blocks every play. He's going to give you everything he's got. And he's lower because he did have an injury history and maybe some on-the-field issues with, he got into that fight with the Georgia Tech guy. But all in all, this is a player who some people say could become the wide receiver one, not just for the Steelers, but become a top 10 wide receiver in the NFL sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and a lot of, let's call them draft nicks, right? People who specialize in the NFL draft saying that Pickens, if he turns out being the best wide receiver from this class, that they wouldn't be surprised at all. So, hey, you're able to get that guy at pick 52. I think you'll take that every time. You got to be excited about that. Now, as you mentioned, you don't get a guy like that at 52 just randomly or without rhyme or reason, right? The reason he was there at 52 is because some of the injury concerns, some of the off-the-field stuff. Everyone's seen the highlight of him. I mean, not fighting a guy from Georgia Tech, Chris, just ragdolling a dude from Georgia Tech. I mean, he was giving him the business. There was an incident where, he was on the sideline and he was squirting water bottles on Tennessee players, from
I
the
saw
sideline.
that. I was like, oh, boy.
Things like that, hey, are they my favorite thing in the world? No, but they're certainly not massive red flags to me either. I will take a guy with some dog in him, with some fight in him. You get him in-house, you polish him up a little bit, you give him a little bit of structure. I think it's an absolute no-brainer. I'm sure there were a lot of people that were, saying, hey, maybe Sky Moore, maybe you go the local kid here at 52. You and I talked about him a lot leading up in the process, and if he could still be on the board there. I think when George Pickens was there, you had to take the risk. It is maybe a little bit of the inverse of what they did with their first pick, honestly, Chris. I think a lot of people who are criticizing the Kenny Pickett pick, and that's going to be a challenge here for the next couple weeks.
It really is.
The Pickett pick, the Pickens pick, Pickett to Pickens. Some people, their beef is just that they thought that was the safe bet for the Steelers, right? You take the guy with the highest floor. You take the guy who was right next door. You don't maybe go Willis, who some people think has more potential. If that was your grief with Kenny Pickett at 20, well, then I think Pickens should be the complete opposite for you at 52. Because at 52, the Steelers could have been, and I'm using air quotes here, the people watching on YouTube can see,
Right.
could have been safer. There could have been certainly safer picks at 52 than George Pickens, because again, he was still there for a reason. But in terms of upside, you're not getting a higher ceiling than just that absolute stud from Georgia. No way.
And the other guy, Calvin Austin, everyone knows him as a burner. But if you watch his tape, I mean, the guy runs sharp routes. He's quick. He's twitched up. The term that people use is twitched up. I always hear that term.
I love. That's a new term over the last couple years.
Yeah, it's become a thing in the draft community, but it's real, because twitched up just means your body can contort in so many different directions, and you can react and stop and go in a complete different direction so quickly. And he does that very well. He has several reps that you can see on tape where he completely jukes out a defender who's trying to stick with him in space, and that's a factor here. Ahmad Gardner, one of the top cornerbacks of this class, some people felt like he was the top cornerback of this class, said that Calvin Austin was the man he had the hardest time guarding, and he had to guard the Alabama wide receivers with that crew. That says a lot in favor of Calvin Austin. I like his tape. I like his speed. I like how he can factor in here. And again, you look at what those two guys bring and how they'll be able to, you fit them in with Deontay Johnson and Chase Claypool, and you have a very diverse set of skills in the wide receiver room.
No, 100%. And that's what I love about Calvin Austin too. You and I, we've been doing this every week for a long time, and the last 3 months or so have pretty much exclusively been draft talk. There's been some free agency stuff and things like that mentioned in there, but the majority of it has been draft conversation and filling out the roster and all those different things. I mean, Chris, you and I have said a dozen times at least, the one skill set that felt like it was missing from that wide receiver room was just a burner. Just someone who could take the top off, someone who can run right past you. And Austin seems to fit that billing. I'm sure a lot of Steelers fans have figured this out by now or heard this by now, but those who haven't, he actually went to Memphis on a track scholarship originally. He went to Memphis on a track scholarship while playing football at the same time, but he was on a track scholarship. I mean, that's how polished, that's how accomplished this guy just was as a pure runner, as a pure athlete when he got to Memphis. You've clearly seen the growth from him. I mean, at the Senior Bowl, he was just turning dudes inside and out. He's got the endorsement from Sauce Gardner. I think he's another one. You've got to love the upside there and the potential. And, all of a sudden, the Steelers wide receiver room goes from a big question mark and all right, how are we going to fill this out? There really needs to be some talent infusion there. There needs to be some depth added there. In the past couple weeks, you had Pickens and Austin in the draft. You make a nice waiver wire pickup of Miles Boykin as well, too. I think we are all infinitely more confident and feeling better about that room than we were just 2 weeks ago.
I agree entirely. And the question I have, though, is, did they have the best wide receiver haul of this class? We'll talk about that in a second, comparing them to other receivers, where they went and how they went in just a minute here. But first, we're going to talk to you guys about betonline.net. And y'all know about betonline.net. It's your number one source for all your sports betting and information. You can find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, news, including this year's NBA playoffs, the Stanley Cup playoffs, and Major League Baseball, all right at betonline.net. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information. You can find about live betting to help you place the best bets out there. You could go and make bets on the playoffs, esports, and a whole lot more. So head to their website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in the action when you visit BetOnline, where the game starts. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm Chris Carter. He's Wes Euler of Steeler Nation Radio, and we are talking here about the wide receiver position and how the Steelers got their wide receiver haul, and if it was the best haul of the NFL draft. Thanks again for making the Locked On Steelers podcast your first listen every day. Wes, let's talk about this, because I looked around the league, and there were a ton of wide receivers that went. The only team that took that, well, there were 3 teams total that took 2 wide receivers in this class. The Steelers were, of course, one of them. The Packers were another, and actually they took 3. So but one of theirs was in the 7th round. But they took Christian Watson, of course, of North Dakota State, Romeo Doubs of Nevada, and Samori Toure of Nebraska. And I believe the other team was actually the Browns, who took David Bell from Purdue and Michael Woods of Oklahoma. But everyone else just took one wide receiver. And some of those wide receiver hauls were just the Falcons getting Drake London, or the Jets getting Garrett Wilson, or the Saints getting Chris Olave, the Lions getting Jameson Williams, the Commanders getting Jahan Dotson, the Titans getting Treylon Burks. And then that's when you start to get into that second round grade where George Pickens would fall. But do you think it's a definitive thing that you could probably say right now, even before all this gets started, that the Steelers, at least a couple days out of the NFL draft, that their wide receiver haul was the best of this crew?
I think that's fair. Yeah, I do. Certainly, like if you're just looking at it from a pure depth perspective, I would say 100%. If you're asking me, hey, would you rather have Pickens and Austin or Garrett Wilson? Would you rather have Pickens and Austin or Olave?
That's a tough question.
I might lean the other way, but in terms of the quality that they got there with the quantity, with the multiple guys as well too, I don't think anyone did better than that. Certainly, like I said, I mean, I would probably take one of the guys from Ohio State, maybe even Jameson Williams as well too, just with all the upside that's there. But if you're looking at it from a bigger picture, the entire draft haul, the Steelers potentially getting 2 wide receivers that are going to play in the league for a long time. I don't think it's being too homer to suggest that or agree with that. No, I don't. I think that's fair.
Here's my other thing about this, because also the haul isn't just about the players that you got. It's about the need that you had and the things that you got to get ready for, because the Packers went out and got Christian Watson, but they just lost Devontae Adams. I'm not so sure Christian Watson's ready to step in and be this superstar on day one. I like his upside. He's another player who can skyrocket if things go right in the NFL. I think he has to work on his hands a little bit more. But you know, when it comes to needs, the Packers needed a number one star stud dude to go in there and to be ready right away. It made sense to try, if you were in the first round, to maybe trade up to get an Olave, a Williams, a Wilson, one of those type of guys. They didn't do that. They doubled down on defense with Devontae Wyatt and Quay Walker in the first round, as if they just seem to hate Aaron Rodgers or something. But the Steelers, on the flip side of that, they didn't necessarily need the top end wide receiver of this class. What they needed was to get 2 guys to come in and be ready to at least compete and work with Claypool and Johnson for at least this year, because those are going to be the 2 top guys. They have the experience. They're the guys that have been there. They know the system. They worked with Matt Canada. They're going to be the guys that presumably hold the top 2 spots. And then these 2 guys kind of work their way up. And if they surpass them, great. But there's no pressure to have to surpass them, because they have 2 established wide receivers that one has great separation skills and improved his catching ability this year. And Deontay Johnson needs to improve a little bit more. The other is Chase Claypool, who had a great first year, had a so-so second year, but still has a lot of upside that he could probably tap into, and you could have a room. But on top of all of that, you're in a position where over the next 2 years, Deontay Johnson's contract comes up after this season, and Chase Claypool is going to come up after next season. And you're going to need to be in a position where you're seeing all these wide receivers, they either want big money or they're out. Deebo Samuel's at odds with his guys. A.J. Brown just got traded away.
DK Metcalf.
DK Metcalf's in a situation. Terry McLaurin's in a situation. And heck, Deontay Johnson might be in a situation right now. There was also the rumor he unfollowed the Steelers on Instagram.
He's got more cryptic tweets going, Chris.
And then he's got the cryptic tweets going. And that's every wide receiver. Because every wide receiver is just they tweet out some things that are just dark and mysterious. But like a Zack Snyder DC movie. And again, dark and mysterious for no reason. That's why I'm making that reference, because Zack Snyder DC movies are just so bad. But it's just like, what are you doing? What's the message you're trying to convey?
The real ones got that reference, Chris.
Exactly. Thank you so much. People understand me. But back to the point of this, I think what makes this the best haul is that not just the talent on it, but this now frees up the Steelers. If Deontay Johnson stinks this year, or is even just decent, it's like, all right, we can't pay you wide receiver 1 money because we got those guys. And the same thing for Chase Claypool next year. If Chase Claypool turns into a superstar, or Deontay Johnson does, okay, great, pay you. And then we'll figure out what happens with those guys next. But if you don't, you got people behind you. And something that Arthur Moats always says on your show on Steeler Nation Radio, you gotta love competition.
You absolutely do. And you want competition at every position. And buddy, I'm with you. The more and more this would be like I think the 5th or 6th NFL draft that I've covered. It was my 4th for the Steelers. I was working for the Eagles for 2 or 3 years before that. So 6th or 7th NFL draft that I've covered. And as I've really gotten in tune with these things over the last few years, I've had this conversation with you before. Like, I'm more and more convinced than ever that you should be drafting wide receivers every other year on day 1 or day 2. Just and have them for 4 or 5 years and then let them walk. Mm-hmm. Because as you mentioned, the wide receiver market is absolute bonkers right now. Mm-hmm. And when you look at that and what, I don't want to say average, but only slightly above it. Like, Christian Kirk is an above average wide receiver. He's not great. He's not legendary. He's not all time. He is an above average wide receiver, and he's getting huge money. So obviously, right then, what does that do for the AJ Browns of the world and the DK Metcalfs of the world and the Tyreek Hills and the guys that actually are top talents? Well, it bumps their number up even more. I just think that's a dangerous game to play, particularly when you consider, look at the last 3-4 years alone. There are 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 wide receivers coming out every year that are having instant impact. That by their second or third season are great wide receivers. A lot of times at the end of their rookie year, they're great wide receivers. And yeah, a lot of those guys are Jamar Chase, and you got to be picking in the top 5 to get them. But some of them are Justin Jefferson too, and they're drafted in the 20s, and they're still putting up just ungodly numbers. So the more and more these drafts go by now, I just think the wide receiver position is so loaded every year. You draft one in the top 90 and one of your first 3 picks every single season, every other season, I guess, to be fair. You draft one in the top 3 rounds every other season, and you just keep that cycle going. And I think that's what the Steelers are trying to do now. And Chris, there's some young money vibes there for me. There really is. Yep. There was, a decade ago, people were looking at it and going, you got Mike Wallace, you got Emmanuel Sanders, you got Antonio Brown. Hines Ward was still there for some. Like, this wide receiver room is loaded. And what'd you do? You let it play out. Some of them walked. Antonio Brown ends up getting big money. That is, I think, the way to do it. Yeah, you're going to pay some of these guys, but the ones you should pay should be the ones that are true, Pro Bowl, all-pro caliber type guys. For me, other than that, with wide receivers, there are so many talented ones coming out every single year. You can draft them quite often in the 2nd and 3rd round even. You've got them on cheap deals for 4 years. And then if they want you to break the bank and they're not worth it, you tell them thank you for your service, and you just keep repeating that cycle. I think that's a smart, savvy, cap-friendly way to operate.
To your point, here's a mock draft from WalterFootball.com for next year, one of the 2 early mock drafts. He has 4 wide receivers going next year in next year's first round. Jackson Smith and Njigba. I'm very sorry, I definitely just butchered that guy's name. But the kid from Ohio State, I definitely just did that. I wasn't looking that up in time.
That's okay. That's all right.
Dante Demas of Maryland, Parker Washington of Penn State, and of course Jordan Addison of Pitt, and probably of USC or some other.
That Trojan wide receiver. Yeah, I've heard of him.
Yeah, that guy. But point being, that's 4 guys right now, and who knows whose stats are going to blow up this year and make everyone say,
somebody in Alabama or LSU or Georgia who barely played, but will be a stud next year.
It's going to happen. And again, these are just the first round guys. There's going to be second round guys. But to your point, there seems to always be top tier talent coming out of the wide receiver position. And part of it, I think, is the culture of today. If you're a wide receiver, you got to be fast. Or if you're not fast, you got to be quick. And if you're not quick, and if you're not tall, you got to be extremely quick. And you got to run great routes. And if you don't run great routes, you better catch the ball in every situation. And you don't make it as a top receiver without one of those traits. So every year in the NFL draft, it's
absolutely
there's not I can't think of a year where at least one really good receiver didn't come from it. We could think of bad quarterback drafts, bad edge rusher drafts, bad linebacker drafts, bad cornerback drafts. I can't think of a bad wide receiver draft off the top of my head because they're often really talented. There's a lot of them, and at least 3 to 4 of them stick out and become stars.
Absolutely. And Chris, it's like you can follow the trail of breadcrumbs, right? When you and I were kids, like, we both grew up in the 90s. The position that everybody wanted to play on the football team was running back. Everybody wanted to be the running back. You go to middle school, you go to Pop Warner football practices now, Everybody wants to be, high school practice is now 7-on-7 ball. Everybody wants to be the wide receiver because it's flashy, because you get to score a lot of touchdowns, because you don't get hit very much. Like,
Exactly.
all the best athletes 20 years ago, 25 years ago, they were playing running back. Now they're all playing wide receiver. It's just it's a position, Chris, with a plethora of talent every single year.
You go. Every single year, and which is why it pays to go get good ones in the draft. And if you get a great one, if you get an Antonio Brown, because like you said, I think Young Money, and I think we'll end this segment on this point. Young Money is a great representation. They went over a span of a couple years. They already had Hines Ward. They lost Antonio Holmes because he was going crazy and they needed to get rid of him. They're like, we can't put up with that anymore. They went and got Emmanuel Sanders and Antonio Brown in the same draft. And a year before that, they went and got Mike Wallace in the 3rd round. So they spent 2 third-rounders and a 6th-rounder on the position. You had Young Money, and for the next 4 or 5 years, they were the crew. Young Money, cash money, fast money, all that stuff. And then and what happened? Mike Wallace got paid to go somewhere else. Fine, he goes somewhere else. You get a comp pick for that money. Emmanuel Sanders, he gets paid to go somewhere else. Fine, you go somewhere else. You do great. And what did you get? You got the best receiver of the bunch right there. And that's a part of the big reason people praise so much of the Steelers wide receiver picking habits, which is why, again, I think this. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, and they come from everywhere too.
Like, come from everywhere.
You don't just have to go to Georgia and Alabama and LSU to get your wide receivers. I mean, all the Deontay Johnson, Antonio Brown, Emmanuel Sanders, a lot of those guys we just named, they didn't go to Power 5 schools. The North Dakota State guy, Christian, his name's Watson, that's escaping me right now. I mean, he's a 1AA guy, like, and he went very early in the 2nd round. You can find these wide receivers everywhere because, again, they're just athletes across the board. Calvin Austin, Memphis. I mean, these guys are everywhere, and I just think that's the smart way to do business right now is keep them for 4 or 5 years and then thank them for their service and have the next guy in the wings.
Absolutely. And again, I think it's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out for the Steelers, but they're playing it the right way. And this is a big reason why the Steelers have been known as the best wide receiver drafting team in the NFL. And I think they did it again with their haul this year being the best of this class. We're going to take a break in a second, but just to let y'all know, we still take calls in this show. We haven't done a lot lately because the NFL draft was pushing a lot of content. We got a caller who's calling in. We'll address their question here with myself and Wes answering their question right here in the Locked On Steelers podcast. But first, we got to talk to you guys about RockAuto.com. You can save time and money when using RockAuto.com. Just visit their website and you'll be saving yourself either 30%, 50%, even 100% on the same parts that you get from a chain store or car dealership. For example, if I went to a car dealership right now for a Honda Odyssey fuel pump, it would have cost me $353. If I go to Rock Auto, it's $216. That's a ton of money that I'm saving, and it's right from the comfort of my own home that I'm doing it. Rock Auto is a family-owned business that served do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years, and Rock Auto's prices are reliably low for every customer. They have everything that you could need, from brake parts to tail lamps to motor oil, and even new carpet for your car or truck. So go to explore their easy-to-use website today to find the solution for your auto part needs. And when you do go to rockauto.com, be sure to see all the parts available for your car or truck, because you never know what you could need. And when you place your order, write Locked On in there. How did you hear about us box, so that they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Visit rockauto.com today. Back here in the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm Chris Carter. He's Wes Euler from Steeler Nation Radio and the Ears and Beers podcast. Wes, now I tell people all the time, you can call into this show. I like to take questions. I like to get perspective from fans and answer some questions. And this question I dealt with a little bit yesterday, but I wanted to get your input in from. We had a question about Joe Haden, because the Steelers didn't draft a cornerback. I thought that they would at some point. I thought that they would say, hey, if a CB1's available, go get him. If we can get a guy that can replace Justin Lane in the depth chart, because he hasn't been
Trent
great.
McDuffie might have been that guy at 20 when we were waiting for the news.
I was looking at that. I was like, man, him and Andrew Booth are sitting there. So those were interesting picks here. But we had Alex from California who had this question about Joe Haden.
Hey, Chris. Thank you for taking my voicemail here. My name is Alex from California. Big fan of the show, big fan of the Steelers. I just had a question hopefully you can help me out with. I'm just wondering, why don't the Steelers give Joe Haden a smaller contract? Why are they just letting him go to free agency? I think he was a good fit. at the cornerback position, a position of need in our team, and it seemed like every time he played, we were able to win, and when he wasn't there, we lost. So just wondering why not Joe Haden? Thank you.
And thank you, Alex, for your phone call. Reminder, if you ever want to call into the show, just call 412-223-6644. Be sure to leave a voicemail with your name and where you're from. And try to keep your voicemail anywhere from like 30 seconds to 45 seconds long. The longer ones make it harder for me to add to the show because they're long. And also, if you're out of the country, just send an email with your voicemail attached as an MP3 to LOSteelersTopicBag@gmail.com. So again, LOSteelersTopicBag@gmail.com or 412-223-6644. So Alex's question about Joe Haden. Crazy enough, I talked to you about and Moats about this on the Monday episode with you guys on Steeler Nation Radio. I also talked about this briefly on at the end of my episode yesterday. But reiterating my point before I get to US, I think that it would be smart to look at Joe Haden. I know he's 34 years old when this season starts. I know that he's way past his prime and he can't keep up with the fast receivers in the NFL anymore. But the guy is so smart. He has technique. He knows what he's doing when he's out there, and he's a leader. People get around that guy. People follow him. Even this year when he wasn't at his best, when the cornerbacks were all hanging out around each other, you know who was at the center of the hangout? It was Joe Haden. And that is worth something. But Wes, is Joe Haden too old to be one of your cornerbacks right now, especially when they've gotten Ahkello Witherspoon, Levi Wallace, Cam Sutton, and they brought back Arthur Maulet, and you still got guys like James Pierre and Justin Lane hanging around?
I don't think he's too old to be one of your cornerbacks. I would not want him being the guy right now. I would still think I would want Ahkello and Levi higher in that pecking order. But you know what? Alex made a great point in his call there that I think it's very simply stated, but it's so correct. Last year when Joe Haden played, Steelers won the majority of those games. Last year when Joe Haden didn't play, Steelers lost the majority of those games. Hey, is it really distilled all the way down to that last year? No, but there is certainly some rhyme or reason there as well too. I think if you could have Joe Haden in the mix with all those guys that you just mentioned, and you could do so at a team-friendly cost, I think that's a no-brainer, honestly. Because, yeah, we're all really high on Ahkello Witherspoon, Chris, after what he was able to do down the stretch last season. But let's also not forget the first half of the season, where when we saw him against the Raiders, it was ugly. He wasn't getting a helmet for a while, and now he was able to dig himself out of that, and there's certainly credit deserved for that. But I also don't think you're ready to crown Ahkello Witherspoon as just a dude who's going to be able to do it for you for 17 games just yet. I'm not saying he can't, but I don't want to assume that either. Levi Wallace, maybe another similar example. He filled in admirably in the back half of the season for the Buffalo Bills and in the playoffs whenever Tre'Davious White, one of the best corners in the NFL, went down for Buffalo. He slid in there very nicely and did a great job. But he also has never done it when he's been expected to be the guy starting week one to do it for 17 games. So, yeah, we have faith in Cam Sutton. And, yeah, as you mentioned, there's some other guys there that certainly are going to be in the mix. But if you can bring Joe Haden back on a 1-year cheaper deal, maybe if it's even a 2-year deal, but all the money for the most part is front loaded, I would have no problem with that. I don't think just because he's still out there, Chris, I will say this, though, caveat. A lot of times when guys are still available on the free agent market at this period, late April into May, getting closer to OTAs and minicamp and all that stuff, people just assume it's because they have no market or because the money's not right. That is the case certainly sometimes, but it's not the case all the time. I think we saw that with Tyrann Mathieu just today or just yesterday. A lot of people were thinking, well, the Steelers could get Tyrann Mathieu for cheap. No, that was never the case. He was just waiting. He had no need to rush, and he still got his money from the Saints. That was one of the dominoes that needed to fall, though. As you start to see more and more of these guys come off the board in the secondary, I think all of a sudden that clears the muddy waters of what the market is for defensive backs, for corners, and for safeties. If that for Joe Haden is a 1-year deal and just a couple $1 million, I think that's a no-brainer because you wouldn't need him to be the guy for 17 games. You would just need him to be the guy in moments and situationally. And I think he proved last year that he can still do that, even though he is, obviously a little bit longer in the tooth, not exactly wet behind the ears anymore.
No, exactly. And that's the thing. And one point to your point also, and to Alex's point, so again, great call, Alex. But the Steelers were 7-3-1 when he started.
Yeah,
If he
that's
started
crazy.
again,
It's
and they
crazy.
finished 9-7-1. So that
You do
meant
the math on that one.
they're 2-4.
Carry the 6,
They were
divide by
2-4 when he didn't
3
play. Yeah,
times,
right. I had to do all the math.
carry the 2.
But they were 2-4 without him. 7-3-1 with him. That says a lot. And they definitely don't beat the Titans without him, because that tackle he made on that fourth down
best
play,
tackle he ever made in his career.
best tackle of his career. I mean, he even said, I put my heels on the first down marker, and he made the tackle. And to me, that was one of the highlights of the season. Not just the tackle itself, but when you see, and it's funny because I was in the press box for that one, so I don't get the TV advantage, but you see Cam Hayward explode when they got that stop, and you see him short, we got him. And it's just like that whole thing. That's what Joe Haden brings. He knew he wasn't quick enough to run with that receiver. He knew that he wasn't going to win that if they was one-on-one, but he knew he needed to play to a spot, defend the marker, and he did it. And that was a veteran move on his part that won them one of their biggest upsets of the season, and they don't make it to the playoffs with that. So
and that's what you can ask Joe Haden to be. The guy that you're not calling on him for 17 weeks in a row to be the man. But situationally, he's still, you know what, Chris? It could be a little bit like Ben Roethlisberger last year.
Could be.
I mean, we're far enough removed from this in emotion. Right. We're far enough emotionally and removed from this now. I think we could all admit the majority of the last season was not great for Ben. But you know what was great? When there was 5 minutes left in the fourth quarter and the team needed to score some points, when there was 10 minutes left in the game and the team needed 2 drives and the defense got to stop it between there, that I think is the type of magic that Joe Haden could still muster in moments when you really need him.
You know who also this reminds me of? James Harrison. In his final years, you just threw him at the end of the game. Hey, James Harrison, go get him. Yes, sir. And he would go crush.
He could be your closer in a way. Yeah.
He could be a closer cornerback when you know, hey, we're gonna run zone a lot in this next series. Joe, go out there and play this off zone coverage and do what you do, baby.
You're up 4 points and there's 3 minutes left, and you know the other team's coming out throwing the ball. Get Joe Haden out there on the field. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Get him out there. Let those guys pin their ears back and go after the quarterback, and get Haden out there in coverage.
Exactly. And yeah, sure, you could get a Kevin King. He's 6'3". He's still a free agent. He had a year with 5 interceptions a couple years ago, and he's only 27 years old. Like, that could be out there. And I'm not against getting a Kevin King, but I'm saying you got a lot of CB2s already on your roster, guys who are fighting to establish themselves in the NFL. Joe Haden's been there. He's been done that, and he loves your organization. You love him, knows your system. Everyone's would welcome him back. It just seems like it would make a lot of sense. So we'll see if that does happen. We'll keep you up to date. We didn't get to talk about the Devin Bush situation. He did not get his fifth year extension. I'll be talking more about that tomorrow on the Locked On Steelers podcast with Tony Serino, who is making his triumphant return. We missed him last week because he was sick, but we're glad to have him back now. Wes, thanks so much for joining us. Let people know they can find you, follow you, and get more of your work.
Yes, sir. Always a pleasure. Chris Carter and company. On Twitter, at Wesley Euler, always posting what I'm doing there. But I host the Steelers Blitz with Arthur Moats. You can find us in podcast form wherever you get your podcasts, Steelers Blitz. You can also find us live at noon on Steelers Nation Radio. You can access us there through iHeart, your iHeart app, Steelers.com, Steelers app as well. And then, as Chris is always kind enough to mention, for those tortured WVU souls like me, Ears and Beers for your Mountaineer sports talk as well on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts.
Absolutely. Do check Wes out. He does amazing work everywhere he does. Thank you, Wes, for coming on the show. As always, you're a treasure to the show. Thank you all for listening and watching the Locked On Steelers podcast. We appreciate everyone. I want to shout out to all of our listeners because over this past week and going into Monday, when I checked all the rankings, so if you can go up and look on Chartable, what are the most listened to podcasts at every given point in the week, we reached the top 30 of most listened to football podcasts in the United States. And we rank up there in other countries as well, but that's a big demographic for us. That's a big win for us. We also ranked in the top 120 at one point of overall sports podcasts listened to in the United States. That's amazing. You guys are great. Steeler Nation is awesome. We thank you so much for supporting this show. It's a big milestone for us. Thank you so much. And we hope that you keep riding with us throughout the offseason. Steelers rookie camp, May 13th through 15th. we're going to be talking about it. We're going to be bringing people on. Heck, I'm going to try to be there. So we're going to try and talk about that as much as we can. If you want to see where Kenny Pickett's at, we're going to be talking about it right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Thanks so much for checking us out. Remember, you can follow us on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, or YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to our YouTube channel for all of our daily content. And if you want to help us out even more, go on Apple Podcasts. Leave us a 5-star review with a positive comment. Do both at the same time, and I'll get you a shout out at the end of the show. Back tomorrow with Tony Serino for a Tony Wednesday. Missed on the alliteration this week for West Wednesday and Tony Tuesday, but we'll get it right one of these days. Thanks again for checking us out. Back on your screens and in your ears very soon.